Today we're back for another episode of 3 on 3. We're taking a close look at 3 watches that feature in-house movements and come with stainless steel cases. Our watches today come from some of the top brands in contemporary horology. Jack has the Rolex Oyster Perpetual 36mm. James has Omega's Seamaster Aquaterra 150 meters. And I have the Grand Seiko SBGR 253J. Jack, would you like to take us away?
Yeah, sure. I had a chance to work with a 36mm version of the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. It has inside it the caliber 3130. This is not the newest version of Rolex's escapement technology. That's the Chronergy escapement, which is rolled out in some other watches. And Rolex started making their own in-house balance springs relatively recently in the brand's history, the Parachrome Blue balance spring. That's a niobium alloy balance spring that provides a very high degree of resistance to magnetism. But this watch to me is interesting because it's still a watch first and a Rolex second, and I mean that in a good way.
Mm-hmm. Great. And how about your watch, James?
Yeah, so I have the 38mm version of Omega's Aqua Terra. It's 150-meter water resistant. So it's their kind of spin on a sport watch that has some sort of aquatic aspirations, but of course isn't a dive watch, is a little bit kind of dressier than the Railmaster, and really makes a case for itself with a lovely dial design and a lot of just kind of everyday wearable charm. On top of that, you of course get a very advanced movement. This is the caliber 8800. You know, you're getting a lot of bang for your buck when it comes to the movement because it's so meticulously high-end, hugely amagnetic, 15,000 Gauss. You know, you're getting the coaxial escapement, which is great, and it's something that Omega has been able to commoditize and then make an entire platform out of its performance.
And I have a 37mm Grand Seiko automatic. Like pretty much every Grand Seiko that you'll see, what really jumps out about this watch is the quality of the dial work. The hands and the indexes are really quite superbly done. Also the casework. And then of course you get a really finely made in-house movement. I love the fact that it runs at a standard rate of 28,800 VPH, but you still have 72 hours of power reserve. This is a really modern, excellent execution, and it's really fantastic.
So with the Aquaterra, it's an interesting sort of watch from a style standpoint because I think of the 3, it makes kind of the biggest statement as far as having a very defined aesthetic, and it's one that Omega's been using for a while. It has this fairly iridescent blue dial that has a kind of horizontal banding that's meant to invoke the teak decks of a yacht.
Ah.
The blue, on the other hand, is kind of loosely resplendent. It's quite fancy, I would say, but they've done it in a way that feels kind of metered and easy to wear. And on wrist, I think it wears really well. It's super comfortable, and I think it looks great.
Well, this Rolex, there's absolutely nothing about it that is attempting to overtly display anything except the time. It delivers that information so instantly and so legibly. It has a clarity and a simplicity that I find extremely attractive. Without getting into sort of anything too mystical, I mean, this is a Rolex after all. I feel like it almost expresses the classic Swiss watchmaking ethic. This is a fantastic ambassador for, what makes watchmaking in Switzerland desirable.
I've noticed this not just with this watch, but with other Grand Seikos too, is it's the kind of watch that you find yourself looking at.
For sure.
All the time. Even right down to the date window. It's perfectly framed in a way that is proportional with the hands and the indexes on the dial.
I've been lucky enough to go to Japan a couple of times and actually see these things being made. And let me tell you, they are giving the Swiss, in terms of devotion to craft, for its own sake, they're giving the Swiss a lot of
The amount of
competition.
handwork that goes into the movements in the dial.
It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. Yeah. I mean,
polishing in between the teeth.
Literally every index on every dial of every Grand Seiko is diamond polished by hand by one guy who has a little hand mirror that he uses to check and make sure the light's reflecting off it the way it should. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
And you're charging what for this?
One thing I will say is that I love the 37mm case size. This is, for me in a Grand Seiko, it might be perfect. My only small critique would be that at 13.3 millimeters thick, that's a little bit proportionally thick, I think, for a case of this diameter. I am not a bracelet guy. I like to have the bracelet, but I almost instantly put it on some cool strap, that I just source on my own.
And to its credit, it's got drilled lugs.
Oh, of course, yeah. So it makes changing the strap super easy.
Which, by the way, which is something just in general I wish more manufacturers would offer, especially on the entry-level sports watches.
It makes for a much easier owning experience, and also it looks great. It kind of ties it back to vintage watches.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's really good. Jack, how have you found the wearability of your Rolex?
I mean, it's fantastic. The white dial makes the watch wear a little bit bigger than 36 millimeter. It's just a very versatile watch. Super, super comfortable, instantly legible, pretty much any lighting conditions you could want. You put it on and it seems as if it's been there all your life.
So with this model, it's about 44 millimeters lug to lug, which is really wearable. The size of the watch starts to become part of the overall aesthetic. You're looking at just a hair over 12 millimeters, which is pretty wearable for something that has a screw down crown and 150 meters water resistance. And I think shorts and t-shirt all the way up to anything short of a very fancy formal environment. You could wear something, not on the rubber of course, but you could wear something like this without issue. It's funny to think of these three watches together because they're almost a pretty solid collection because they're kind of different. This would make
I
a fairly
actually have not thought of it that way.
They're very similar,
but like a fairly
a
interesting
great three-watch
vacation
collection
watch,
here.
right?
Yeah.
A fairly interesting vacation watch. You've got your water resistance, super sporty, and you're not going to worry about taking this into conditions where it might get magnetized, or it's the right size, so you're not going to bang it on everything. Something like this, especially if you threw it on a finer leather strap, you've got your dress watch, and then at the end you've got your everyday.
Right.
And I think that they all excel at those areas in really special ways.
So if push came to shove and you had to put your money where your mouth was and buy one of these watches, and let's start with James, which would it be?
The Rolex.
The Rolex.
I like a white dial Rolex. It's what I wear every day. It's an Explorer 2 with the polar dial. And I tried that on very briefly. I don't know how much I would connect with the 36 millimeter sizing. I might just go with a vintage piece
Right.
to get a little bit more character that way. But of the three, that one connects most closely with my personal style with the light dial.
People are going to be pissed about this, but I have to cop out. Like, I really don't know. I mean, I do not currently own a watch with a coaxial escape, and I've always wanted one. I've been to Japan and I've seen how Grand Seiko is made. I've seen the devotion these people give to their work. And I'm not currently a modern Rolex owner, but geez, I want to take this guy home.
I really like this watch a lot. However, I, like Jack, am also not at the moment a modern Rolex owner. So I probably, just from where my collection is at this point, I would probably add the Rolex, and it would be the Oyster Perpetual 36 millimeters, probably before any other Rolex. Price would have something to do with that.
Mm-hmm. Would you want this model, the white dial LP?
Perhaps. Is it for sale?
Not from me, my friend. You'll have to speak to the good folks at the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. So John, when you introduced this particular segment of 3 on 3, we said that we were looking at quote-unquote entry-level watches.
Yes.
The one thing about an entry-level watch is you don't want it to feel like an entry-level watch. We're kind of spoiled for choice right now.
Hot competition, for sure.
Very hot competition.
You can't go wrong, certainly, between these three.
The entry level has never looked so good.